The scream of the Geller field was a constant, teeth-grinding hum in the bones of the frigate Divine Retribution. It was not a sound for the ears, but a vibration for the soul. A psychic bulwark against the howling eternity of unreality outside the hull. On the bridge, Captain Valerius stood like a statue of obsidian and grief, his eyes fixed not on the roiling, color-sick vista of the Imperium, but on a single, flickering rune on his command lectern. The rune was labeled Mortis Refrain, and it was cold. They had been hunting the ghost ship for 17 solar months. Not a ship of the enemy, not a vessel of Xenos or Heretic, an Imperial vessel. The Glorious Resolve, a lunar-class cruiser lost with all 40,000 souls during the opening of the Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum. It had been seen since then. Phantom sightings in the warp lanes of the Obscurus margin. Distress calls that were decades old, bleeding through voxcasters on worlds light years away. A shadow that fell across blessed astropathic choirs, leaving them catatonic, whispering of the unkin and the breath of graves. Valerius's orders from Battlefleet Command were explicit, etched onto a scroll of human skin and sealed with the sigil of the Ordo Malleus. Find the Glorious Resolve. Board it. Determine the nature of its continued existence. Purge all corruption. If corruption cannot be purged, annihilate the vessel. No trace is to remain. This matter is one of utmost secrecy. The enemy is not at the gates. The enemy is the gate. Translation to real space in 30 seconds, Captain. The navigator's voice was a dry rustle from within her sealed tank, her third eye, a fever, bright slit of agony. The augurs are confused. There is a gravity well, but it reads as hollow, as absence. Bring us out, Valerius commanded, his voice gravel worn smooth by decades of command and loss. All hands to battle stations. Silence on the lower decks. No hymns, no bells. The Divine Retribution tore itself from the warp's embrace with a shudder that racked every beam and bulkhead. The starfield that resolved on the main oculus was wrong. It was dim, drained of vitality, and at its center hung the Glorious Resolve. It was a wound in space. Its hull, once a proud gunmetal gray, was the color of old bruises and tarnished silver. No light gleamed from its viewports, only a deep, swallowing blackness. No engine glow pulsed from its drives. It listed slightly, a corpse adrift on a silent sea. But the augurs shrieked. Energy signatures flared across its spine. Not plasma, not weapons fire, but psychic readings of impossible magnitude, patterns that mirrored human brainwaves in their death throes, amplified a billionfold. No life signs, reported the Auspex master, his face pale in the glow of his screens. Atmospheric pressure, fluctuating. It reads as both a perfect vacuum and a breathable atmosphere simultaneously. The laws of physics are hesitant here, Captain. Hesitant, Valerius repeated, the word tasting of ash. He had seen the reports from the Cadian Gate, from the worlds swallowed by the rift. He knew what happened to the dead where the veil was thin. They did not rest. Launch the boarding torpedoes. First company, with me. We go in silence. We go in faith. Remember your training. The enemy may wear familiar faces. It may speak with familiar voices. It is not your brother. It is not your sister. It is an echo that wishes to become the scream. The boarding torpedo was a coffin of ceramite and fury. Its only sound, the thunder of its own impact as it welded itself to the hull of the Glorious Resolve. The blast door hissed open, not to the shriek of decompression, but to a profound, aching silence. The boarding ramp extended into a darkness so complete it seemed to drink the light from the powerful lumen beams on the Space Marine's pauldrons. They stepped onto the deck of the ghost ship. The gravity was there, but wrong. A sluggish pull that felt like wading through mud. The air was frigid, yet carried the stale metallic scent of old blood and ozone. And the silence? It was not an absence of sound. It was a presence, a listening quality. Brother Sergeant Cadus led the point, his bolt gun tracing an unwavering line ahead. Their enhanced vision, capable of seeing in near total darkness, struggled. The shadows here had texture, density. They moved at the edge of perception, flowing like liquid smoke. They found the first bodies in a main arterial corridor. Imperial Navy crewmen, still in their uniforms, frozen at their posts. Their faces were not twisted in horror, but slack, empty. Their eyes were open, pupils wide and black, reflecting not the Marines' lights, but a faint, starless void. They were desiccated, mummified by the strange cold, yet not decayed. One still held a data slate, its screen frozen on a final half-typed log entry. "The light is gone. We can hear them singing in the walls. They sound like..." The entry ended. No physical corruption, Cadiz foxed, his sub-vocalized whisper the only noise in the sea of quiet. No marks of violence. Their souls were extracted cleanly. Valerius moved forward, his boots making no sound on the grill deck. He felt it then, a pressure against his mind, not an attack, but an insistence, a memory that was not his own. The taste of recaf, long gone cold. The feeling of a child's hand in his, a child long dead, on a world he could not remember. The aching love for the Emperor, twisted into a desperate, lonely need. "Shields up," he ordered, his psychic hood flaring to life around his collar, a cage of silent lightning. "They are not gone. They are everywhere." They pushed deeper towards the bridge. The sensations grew stronger. Whispers brushed against their audio inputs, not in Gothic, but in emotional signatures. A wave of pure, homesick sorrow, a spike of sudden, petrifying fear, the dull, grinding ache of endless duty. The shadows congealed. They began to see figures out of the corner of their eyes, crewmen walking purposefully to stations that no longer existed, servitors endlessly polishing bare metal, a pair of ratings sharing a laugh over a ghostly bottle of Amasec. The phantoms were translucent, shimmering with a faint internal light, their forms repeating the same moments over and over, like a damaged picked recording. Then, the lights on the bridge flared to life. Not the harsh lumoglobes of a starship, but a pale corpse light that emanated from the very air, and the bridge was manned. Every station was occupied by a shimmering, solidifying phantom. They moved with a jerky, rehearsed synchrony, operating dead controls, staring at dead view screens. At the captain's throne sat a figure of terrible, solid clarity, Captain Orlant of the Glorious Resolve, his uniform pristine, his face a mask of tragic resolve. He turned his head, his eyes meeting Valerius's. They were not voids, like the corpses. They were full of stars, the cold, dead stars of the Cicatrix. His voice echoed not in the air, but directly in the mind of every living being on the bridge. A choir of 40,000 whispers speaking as one. "You have come," the ghost captain said, his tone one of infinite weariness. "We knew you would. The living always come to quiet the dead. But you do not understand. We are not the haunters. We are the haunted. The rift did not kill us. It, unmade our death. It left us here, in this moment, in this pain. We are an echo that cannot fade. And we are so very, very lonely." He stood, and the phantom crew turned as one, their faces now a horrifying mix of longing and desperate hunger. "Stay with us," the chorus of whispers pleaded, a sound that cracked the ceramide of their willpower. "Share our vigil. Become part of the chorus. Your silence is so loud." The psychic wave hit them like a physical tide. It was not malice, not in the way of the demonic. It was a profound, drowning loneliness, a homesickness for a state of being oblivion that had been stolen from them. It seeped through the layered ceramite, through the psychoactive wards of their armor, and pressed directly upon the soul. Brother Lysios, the youngest of the squad, took a staggering step back, his helmeted head shaking as private terrors the face of a dead mentor. The scream of a dying world flashed before his eyes, imposed upon him by the whispering dead. "Stand firm." Valerius's voice was a blade of pure will cutting through the psychic fog. His own mind, tempered by centuries of warfare and hardened by the very grief that now assailed them, was a fortress, but he felt the strain. The ghosts were not attacking their bodies. They were offering an invitation to a shared eternity of despair. To refuse was an act of profound cruelty in their broken logic. They are anchors, echoes seeking form. Do not let their memory become your reality. Sergeant Cadis opened fire. The roar of his bolt gun was a shocking, blasphemous sound in the cathedral-like silence of the Phantom Bridge. Mass reactive shells tore through the console in front of a shimmering helmsman. They did not explode. They passed through the Phantom and the machinery as if through smoke, embedding themselves in the far wall with dull thuds. The helmsman flickered, his form dissolving into a swirl of ectoplasmic mist before slowly recoalescing. His face now showing a flicker of confusion amidst the sorrow. Our weapons are useless, Cadis voxed, falling back into a defensive circle with the others. The phantoms were drifting closer, their forms gaining density, their whispered chorus growing louder, more insistent. The air grew colder. Frost spiderwebbed across the Marine's power armor. Not against the ship, Valerius said, his mind racing. The glorious resolve itself was the vessel, the lens focusing this tragic resonance. The crew were merely the symptom. He accessed his tactical memory, the schematics of a lunar-class cruiser flashing in his mind's eye, the power distribution core, the main psychic bafflers, meant to dampen the warp drive's emanations. If they were overloaded, fed back into the ship's own ghostly energy matrix, we must move. To the engineering decks. We will give them the oblivion they crave. His order was met with grim understanding. Their retreat from the bridge became a nightmare pilgrimage. The corridors of the glorious resolve were no longer empty. They were a thoroughfare for the dead. Phantoms in naval uniforms, in workman's garb, in the tattered robes of menials, crowded the passageways, repeating their final, mundane tasks. A woman endlessly mopped a clean stretch of floor, her tears glowing like molten silver. A group of armsmen stood at a silent attention before a sealed bulkhead that no longer existed. Their whispers followed the living intruders, a susurrus of lost conversations, half-remembered prayers, and fragmented last thoughts. Telmata I. The Emperor protects. He protects. He protects. So cold, why is it so? I don't want to. The shadows themselves had become viscous. They clung to the Space Marine's legs like cold tar, slowing their advance. Ghostly hands, semi-transparent and freezing, reached from the walls, grasping at their armor. Where they touched, a numbing despair followed, a fleeting memory of the void that waited for all things. Brother Lysios cried out as a phantom in an engine seer's robes passed through him. He fell to one knee, gasping, overwhelmed by the sudden, visceral memory of being dissected alive by a cold, mechanical logic that loved him even as it took him apart. Do not stop, Valerius boomed, grabbing Lysios's pauldron and hauling him forward. He fired his plasma pistol into a coalescing mass of shadows ahead. The superheated star stuff did not dissipate them, but it did make them recoil, the ghosts shrieking in a silent frequency that cracked the lenses of Cadis's helmet. They reached a major transit shaft. The elevator was a tomb, filled with the frozen, kneeling forms of a dozen servitors, their maintenance tasks eternally unfinished. The ladder wells were clogged with a swirling psychic mist that pulsed with faint, sad light. We go down, Valerius said, hooking his mag boots to the ladder rungs. Through the heart of them, the descent into the lower decks was a descent into the ship's forgotten pain. Here, the phantoms were different, less human, more raw. They saw the echoes of men and women who had died in the dark, alone, suffocating or burning as systems failed. The emotions here were sharper: panic, betrayal, utter animal terror. The whispering became screaming inside their skulls. The cold became so intense that warning runes flickered on their armor displays, signaling potential joint lock. And then they found the source of the singing. It was in a vast cargo hold, now transformed into a grotesque, unintended shrine. The bodies of the crew were here, thousands of them, piled not in disrespect, but in a silent, desperate congregation. They were the source of the physical corpses, but hovering above them, woven from strands of ectoplasm and despair, was a colossal, shimmering form. It had 40,000 faces, all melting into one another. 40,000 mouths, open in a silent, harmonious dirge. It was the ship's choir, the consolidated echo of the glorious Resolve's crew. Before it knelt the phantom of an Imperial chaplain, his skull helm glowing, his ghostly crozius raised not in defiance, but in a futile attempt to bless what could not be blessed, to sanctify a death that had not been allowed to happen. The entity turned its countless faces towards the intruders. The silent song stopped. The psychic pressure spiked into a singular, focused demand. Stay. The word was not a request. It was a gravitational pull, a law of this new, terrible reality. Valerius felt his own memories rise up the side of his home planet dying. The names of every battle brother he had lost and threatened to unravel. To join the chorus of regret, he saw Cadus lower his bolter, the muzzle dipping towards the deck. He saw Lysios take a step forward, towards the glowing mound of bodies, his hands rising to remove his helmet. The ship itself was winning. It was replacing their purpose with its own endless, looping sorrow. Next part. Valerius did not fight the memories. He weaponized them. He let the pain of his dead world flood him, the screams of billions, the scent of burning atmosphere, the crushing guilt of survival. But he did not let it become despair. He forged it into a single, white-hot point of fury. Not fury at the ghosts, but at the universe that had created this atrocity. At the great rift that had unmade the very concept of peace. No, the word was a thunderclap of pure will, amplified by his psychic hood. It was a negation of the ghost chorus's demand. The psychic backlash snapped Cadus and Lysios back to themselves. The chaplain's phantom flickered, its benediction stuttering. "You have had your vigil," Valerius roared, his mind, voice crashing against the swirling entity. "The Emperor's peace was denied to you. I see it, but you deny it to yourselves now. You cling to the pain because it is all you have left of being alive." The faces in the choir writhed, some contorting in anger, others in profound grief. The whispering surged, chaotic, dissonant. "We are loyal. We held our posts. Where is the light? It is so dark. We did our duty. Your duty is over." Valerius took a step forward, his plasma pistol glowing with building heat. He was not aiming at the choir, but at the space between, at the heart of the resonance. "Your ship is dead. Your war is ended. You are keeping each other prisoner in a memory of dying. I do not bring you salvation. I bring you a verdict, and it is mercy." He turned his head, voxing to his brothers on a closed channel. "The main plasma conduit for the warp drive bafflers. It runs along the starboard wall of this hold. Overload it. Now." Understanding flashed through Cadus. While the ghosts were focused on Valerius's defiant psychic presence, the sergeant moved with the speed only a spacemarine could possess. He sprinted, not towards the choir, but along the periphery of the hold, his armor's servos whining against the clinging cold. Lysios provided covering fire, not at the phantoms, but at the physical conduits and control runes on the walls, shattering them, causing the ghost light to flutter. The choir reacted. The consolidated entity stretched out tendrils of ectoplasm in anguish, trying to envelop Valerius. Where they touched his armor, the ceramite blistered with frost, and the psychic imprint of 1,000 different deaths seared his mind. He stood firm, his psychic hood a blazing corona, holding back the tide of sorrow by the sheer, immovable mass of his purpose. Cadus reached a massive control panel, its screens dark. He didn't try to understand it. He plunged his power fist into the heart of the machinery, tearing out cables swollen with frozen ghostly energy. He crossed the feeds, jamming them together, bypassing shattered safety protocols. A new sound began, a deep, physical groan from the ship itself, a sound of straining metal and waking power. The glorious Resolve had been running on a trickle of its own ghost light. Now, Cadus was forcing the dormant, conventional plasma systems to surge back to life and directly into the psychic dampeners, creating a feedback loop of unimaginable magnitude. Lumoglobes along the ceiling exploded in showers of sparks. The air hummed, the psychic whispers becoming shrieks of alarm. The entity of faces began to unravel, its form stretching and distorting, as the ship's artificial gravity and energy fields went haywire. "Fall back to the transit shaft!" Valerius ordered his mind. Voice strained to its limit as he pushed against the disintegrating choir. The phantoms of the crew were flickering violently, their repetitive loops breaking down. The mopping woman looked up, truly saw for the first time, and her face filled with a heartbreaking moment of clarity and relief before she dissolved into motes of light. The armsmen faded. Their silent vigil finally ended. The Marines fought their way back through the chaos. The corridors were now a storm of dying echoes and rebelling machinery. Conduits burst, spewing not plasma, but geysers of that cold corpse light. The ship was tearing itself apart from the inside, its spectral energy matrix collapsing. They reached their boarding torpedo just as a deep, final tremor shook the glorious resolve. The whispers had coalesced into one last, desperate cry, not of anger, but of release. "Thank you." The blast door sealed. The torpedo detached with a jarring clang. Through the narrow viewport, Valerius watched as the ghost ship's running lights flickered once a final, proper farewell before a chain reaction of psychic and physical energy raced along its spine. It did not explode in a fiery cataclysm. It unfolded. Like a sigh made visible, the ship dissipated into a wave of shimmering silver-gray mist that expanded silently into the void before fading into the eternal blackness, leaving no debris, no wreckage, only silence. Back on the bridge of the Divine Retribution, the Auspex Master reported, his voice hushed. "The glorious resolve is gone. No residual energy, no warp signature. It's just gone." Captain Valerius removed his helmet. The air of his own ship felt too warm, too alive. He could still feel the cold of that profound loneliness in his bones. He looked at the rune for Mortis Refrain on his lectern. It was dark and would remain so. "Log it," he said, his voice hollow. The vessel was destroyed with extreme prejudice. All traces of its existence have been purged. A lullaby, not a battle hymn, not a distress call, a song for children. The implications were a new kind of terror. "Set a course," Valerius commanded, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. "Maximum safe warp velocity, and ready another boarding party. This time, assign a chaplain. Tell him to prepare rites of solace, not exorcism." He looked at the official report on his slate, the lie glaring back at him. He deleted it. He would file no report until he understood the full scope of this silent war. The Imperium feared its own dead for a reason. He was beginning to fear that the reason was vaster and more tragic than anyone had dared imagine. The Divine Retribution turned its prow towards the new, sorrowful beacon, plunging back into the storm of the warp. They were no longer just warriors of the Imperium. They had become something else, shepherds of the lost, reapers of undeath, forced to navigate a new and harrowing frontier where the greatest enemy was the love, loyalty, and memory the Imperium claimed to hold sacred. They sailed towards the lullaby, into a silence, waiting to be filled with the echoes of the innocent, dreading what fresh, gentle horror they would now have to silence forever. The lullaby was the worst of it. It seeped into the Divine Retribution not as a broadcast, but as a psychic resonance, a gentle, insistent hum that bypassed external voxcasters and manifested directly in the minds of the crew. It was a simple tune, one taught in the Schola Progeniums and Hive World creches across the Imperium. The Emperor's light, a blanket bright, to keep you safe all through the night. But here, in the absolute dark of the intermixtual warp, it was a sound of exquisite, gut-wrenching wrongness. It was pristine, unblemished by static, perfectly preserved, a song fossilized in grief. On the Strategium, Chaplain Boreas listened, his Crozius Arcanum held loosely in one hand. His skull helm was off, revealing a face of grim, scarred piety. "It is not a trap," he murmured, his voice like stones grinding. "It is a memory, given amplitude. The ship is not calling for help. It is offering comfort. To whom? We must discover." Captain Valerius observed the crew. Junior ratings blinked away unbidden tears. A hardened weapons officer stared into the middle distance. his jaw clenched, fighting a memory of a childhood he had likely never had. The lullaby was an archetype, a psychic hook that found purchase in the innate human longing for safety. It was a far more dangerous lure than the glorious resolve's sorrowful silence. One resisted terror. One leaned into comfort. The Morning Star. The Auspex, Master confirmed. A Corpus Christi, class troopship, lost transporting a full regiment of the Vostroyan 112th and attached personnel. He posed, his voice dropping. Regimental records indicate the 112th were being rotated off the line after a brutal campaign. They were traveling with families. The unspoken truth hung in the air, colder than the void. Not just soldiers, not just warriors who had accepted death. Children, spouses, civilians. Valerius saw the resolve harden in Chaplain Boreas's eyes. The mission had shifted again. This was not a military salvage operation. It was a recovery of relics from a tomb that refused to be sealed. The same protocol, Valerius ordered, his voice stripped of all inflection. But caution will be paramount. We are not entering a battlefield. We are entering a nursery. The boarding action was a study in surreal horror. The Morning Star's interior was intact, illuminated by a soft, sourceless twilight that mimicked a perpetual dawn. There was no damage, no signs of violence. The air was warm and carried a faint, sterile scent, like a Medicaid ward, and it was filled with phantoms. But these were not the looping, duty-bound echoes of the cruiser. These were keener, simpler echoes. A phantom guardsman polished a lasgun that gleamed with impossible brightness. A woman in a simple dress sat on a non-existent bunk, humming softly, her hands moving as if she were mending a child's tunic. Two translucent children chased each other down a corridor, their laughter a silent, joyous ripple in the psychic atmosphere. The lullaby was stronger here, a physical pressure, a blanket of sound that sought to smother alertness. Valerius felt a profound, almost biological urge to stand down, to rest, to let the gentle light and the soothing song wash over him. His warriors moved with a forced, jerky discipline, their instincts screaming at the profound violation of this peaceful facade. They found the main hold. Here, the nature of the tragedy was unveiled, and with it, the true horror. The hold was designed for mass troop transport, bare and functional. Now, it was a spectral playground. Dozens of phantom children played with toys of light, their forms bright and detailed. Phantom mothers watched over them, their faces serene. Phantom soldiers stood at a loose perimeter, their expressions not of vigilance, but of weary, grateful relief. At the center of it all was a figure of greater solidity, not a military officer, but a woman in the robes of an imperial scholast, a teacher. She glowed with a gentle, golden light, and she was singing the lullaby aloud, her voice the physical source of the psychic broadcast. Her eyes were closed, in peaceful concentration. As the Space Marines entered, the phantoms did not react with hostility or hunger. The children paused their games and looked up, their faces curious, smiling. The teacher opened her eyes. They were not voids, nor star-filled. They were warm, brown, and utterly, heartbreakingly human. "You've come," she said, her voice a tender whisper that carried to every corner of the hold. "Have you come to join us? The fighting is over here. The war is far away. We are safe now. The Emperor has gathered us here, in this quiet light. We can rest." Chaplain Boreas stepped forward, his croziers held low, not in threat, but in benediction. "Sister," he said, his grating voice softened, "there is no rest here. This is a memory, a beautiful, terrible memory. You are holding them here." The teacher's smile didn't falter, but it grew sad. Holding them? No. Protecting them. The warp took us. It was so loud, so angry. I sang to the children. I sang to drown out the noise, and the noise stopped. We arrived here. In the quiet, we are together. We are safe. She looked at the phantom children with infinite love. They deserve safety. After what they saw, after what they heard. Valerius understood. The Morning Star had been lost in a warp storm. In the final, terrifying moments, This woman, this teacher, had done the only thing she could to combat the madness. She had created a pocket of perfect, remembered peace. Her faith and her love had been so potent, they had not just preserved her soul, but the souls of all those around her, imprinting their final, desperate wish for safety onto the very fabric of the ship. They weren't trapped in their death. They were trapped in a perfect pre-death moment of hoped-for salvation. "And you have been safe?" Boreas said, taking another step, his voice a gentle hammer. "For 30 years. But they are not children anymore, sister. Their souls are weary. They need to travel beyond this room. The true Emperor's light awaits, not this." Reflection. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the teacher's face. The lullaby wavered. One of the phantom children, a little girl, looked from the teacher to the immense, grim figures of the space marines. Her form flickered. For an instant, she was not a child of light, but the desiccated, frozen corpse of a little girl in a tattered dress, before snapping back to the illusion. "The light is here," the teacher insisted, but her voice trembled. The protective fantasy was cracking under the weight of truth. She had built a heaven out of a moment's hope, and now the architects of reality had come to inform her it was built on sand. Valerius knew what had to be done. It was not an overload of plasma conduits this time. It was a simpler, more brutal act. They had to break the heart of the one who held it all together. "Tell them the story is over," Valerius said to Boreas, his own heart a lump of lead. "Give them the real rights. Give them the actual peace." Chaplain Boreas raised his crozius high. It began to glow, not with the teacher's gentle gold, but with the fierce, uncompromising light of faith, a light that burned away illusion. He did not shout. He spoke the litany of passing, the true rites for the dead, his voice filling the hold with a sound of finality, of endings, of release. As he spoke, the teacher began to cry. Silvery, psychic tears streamed down her face. The lullaby fractured into a sob, and around her, the beautiful, terrible illusion began to dissolve. The children's smiles faded into looks of sleepy confusion. The mothers reached out, not in fear, but in farewell. The weary soldiers snapped to attention one final time, offering a salute to the chaplain, to the Emperor, to death itself. The light did not go out with a bang, but with a sigh. The phantoms faded, not into mist, but into a soft, upward-moving radiance. As if ascending, the teacher was the last to go, her form dissolving into a shower of golden motes that briefly illuminated the dark, empty, and very physical hold of the morning star. Now silent, now truly dead. In the echoing quiet, Chaplain Boreas lowered his crozius. "Thus, we commit their souls to the Emperor's care," he finished, his voice now heavy with a grief not even his faith could fully elevate. They had not fought a battle. They had euthanized a dream. And Valerius knew, with a certainty that would haunt him until his own end, that for every screaming ghost of a warrior, there might be a dozen of these silent, singing graves, and the Imperium had no doctrine, no weapon, and no prayer that was equal to the task of cleansing them all. Next part, the void after the morning star, was not empty. It was a gallery of absences. Captain Valerius stood on the command deck of the Divine Retribution, the ship now holding position in a desolate stretch of the Carvasi expanse. The data slate before him was a mosaic of sorrow, compiled from fractured astropathic dispatches, navigators' nightmare logs, and the sealed archives of the Ordo Malleus. Each entry was a ghost story. The Eternal Vigil, a space marine strike cruiser lost in the opening salvo of the Rift, last sighted drifting near the Golgina Drift. Its voxcasters broadcast the monotonous repetition of a single battle report, followed by the sound of a chainsword revving, over and over, for 12 standard years. A pilgrim fleet, the Covenant of Blessed Journey, vanished en route to Sanctus. Wreckage found, pristine and empty. Augurs detect the constant, harmonious sound of chanting, as if from a billion throats, localized to a single, intact life pod. All attempts to retrieve it have failed. Boarding teams report overwhelming feelings of pious joy before severing contact. The Forge satellite, calls resolve, declared lost with all 70,000 tech adepts, now orbits a dead star. Its internal forge fires still burn, tended by phantom machinists. They produce nothing but perfect, non-functional replicas of standard template construct components, which they then ritually melt down and reforge in an endless, silent cycle of devotion. Valerius scrolled, the cold weight in his gut solidifying into a dread far heavier than any enemy flagship. This was not a handful of anomalies. It was a pattern, a pandemic of the soul, spreading in the psychic septic field of the Cicatrix Maledictum. The Great Rift hadn't just broken the galaxy, it had broken the process of dying. It had created a state of cosmic purgatory, where faith, duty, love, and fear were no longer ephemeral qualities of life, but had become binding energies, trapping the dead in loops of their own strongest emotions. The morning star was a key, Chaplain Boreas said, his voice a low rumble from the shadows of the strategium. He had not left since their return, as if the void outside held his vigil. It revealed the spectrum, from the warrior's stoic resolve to the civilian's hopeful love. The emotion defines the prison. The stronger the will, the stronger the echo. Sergeant Cades approached, his report on Brother Lysios as grim as expected. The apothecary can find nothing. Lysios speaks only to ask for a data slate. He writes names, hundreds of them. None are of our chapter. None are from our worlds. He writes Marta, most often. He also writes lullaby. He is a vessel, Valerius said, the conclusion inescapable. The memories we encountered, they needed not just a witness, but a repository, a living soul to carry them forward when their own anchor dissolved. He did not fight them hard enough. He pitied them. And now, he carries their ghosts within his own mind. The fate was a new kind of damnation. Not possession by a daemon, but infestation by the poignant, sorrowful echoes of the loyal dead. The navigator's voice cut through the heavy air, strained with a new, sharp urgency. Captain, a signature, not a whisper. A beacon. Deliberate, powerful. It is broadcasting a clearance code, an old one, from before the rift. It identifies as the His Divine Victory. The name struck Valerius like a physical blow. The His Divine Victory, a Gloriana class battleship, flagship of the Segmentum Obscurus fleet, lost with the entire battle fleet Cadia at the Eye of Terror. One of the greatest vessels ever constructed, a symbol of imperial might. It had not just vanished, it had been consumed in the cataclysm that birthed the Cicatrix. It's a trick, Cades said immediately. A demonic lure using a sacred name. The Auspex master shook his head, his face ashen. The code is perfect. The resonance matches pre-rift records exactly, and it's not broadcasting from within the warp. It's in real space, at the designated rally point Omega-7, the last muster point for Battlefleet Cadia before it fell. The implication was universe-shattering. If the His Divine Victory had survived, if even a fragment of that legendary fleet had endured, it would be a flame of hope the Imperium desperately needed. But Valerius knew, in the marrow of his bones, that nothing good came from the grave of Cadia. Set a course, he ordered, his voice hollow. Maximum strategic speed. Ready all weapons batteries. And prepare the entire first company for boarding. Not a squad, the entire company. Boreas looked at him, understanding dawning. You believe it is real. I believe it is the His Divine Victory, Valerius corrected. I no longer know what real means. If the ghost of a teacher can build a heaven from a song, what can the ghost of the greatest battle fleet in history build from its final standing order to hold the line? The translation to real space at Rally Point Omega-7 was an event of sheer, mind-numbing scale. It was not empty space. It was a graveyard of titans. Wreckage stretched across 1 billion kilometers, a frozen constellation of torn hulls, shattered prows, and dead engines. The carcasses of Imperial Navy warships, from swift frigates to mighty battleships, hung in a silent, eternal ballet of destruction. This was the tomb of Battlefleet Cadia, and at its heart, like a mountain range carved from adamantine and grief, hung His divine victory. It was whole. Its colossal hull, 20 kilometers of weapon-studded majesty, was scarred but intact. Its lance batteries were pointed outwards, towards an enemy that had long since moved on. Its void shields were down. No lights glowed from its viewports, but it thrummed with a power that vibrated against the divine retribution's hull. Not the chaotic energy of the warp, but the disciplined, terrifying psychic resonance of a single, unyielding thought, amplified by the souls of 1 million naval officers and crew. Its Vox Hail, when it came, was not a whisper, not a song. It was the clear, firm, and utterly chilling voice of an Imperial fleet admiral, crisp with authority and devoid of any human warmth. Unidentified vessel. This is Fleet Admiral Joris of His Divine Victory, commanding Battlefleet Cadia in the Emperor's name. You have arrived at the designated muster. Assume formation on our starboard flank. The enemy is inbound. The line will hold. The line must hold. There can be no withdrawal. Acknowledge and comply. The message began to repeat. It was a recording. The final standing order, given a decade ago, now a law of physics for the dead. Valerius looked at the tactical display, at the colossal, waiting dreadnought, surrounded by the spectral silence of 1 million dead spacemen still waiting for the battle that had already consumed them. This was not a haunted ship. This was a haunted command, the entire catastrophic last stand of a fleet. Frozen in a single moment of defiant duty, he knew then the true scope of the horror. The Imperium did not just fear the dead, it should fear their loyalty. For in a broken galaxy, even the Emperor's most sacred virtues, duty, courage, obedience, could become the bricks and mortar of an eternal, living hell. First Company, Valerius voxed, his voice the only sound in the crushing silence of the bridge. Prepare to board. Our objective is not investigation. Our objective is a mass mercy, killing. We go to give an entire fleet permission to stand down. He armed his plasma pistol. The light it cast was a feeble, living thing against the monumental, dead certainty of the ghost fleet waiting for them. Boarding His Divine Victory was not a passage through corridors, but a descent into a memory made manifest. The sheer scale of it crushed the spirit. Where the smaller ships had held echoes of individuals or small groups, the Gloriana-class battleship was a psychic engine fueled by the collective, unyielding will of 1 million souls. The air crackled with disciplined purpose. The lumiglobe shone with a hard white light, not the ghostly twilight of the morning star. Here, there was no comfort, no sorrow. There was only duty, stretched into a screaming tautology across eternity. They materialized in a starboard launch bay, a cavernous space big enough to house a squadron of fighters. The scene was one of frenetic, silent activity. Phantom deck crews in crisply preserved uniforms moved in perfect, coordinated patterns, guiding spectral landers that shimmered in and out of existence. Munitions, loaders carried shells of solid light. A flight officer waved signals with glowing batons, his mouth moving in silent, urgent shouts. The loop was not of despair, but of preparation. The battle was always about to begin. It was a machine of war, perfectly maintained, forever on the brink of ignition. No phantom acknowledged them. They were interlopers in a memory so vast and complete, it had no room for the new. The psychic pressure was immense, a constant, silent drill sergeant screaming into their minds. "Man your posts! Check your seals! The enemy comes!" The line holds. "They do not see us," Chaplain Boreas said, his Crozius glowing with a defiant, lesser light against the psychic glare of the ship's obsession. "We are irrelevant to the pattern. We are not part of the order to hold." Sergeant Cadus watched a phantom tech priest run a diagnostic on a phantom Thunderhawk. How do we break a will this strong? We cannot plead with 1 million soldiers to abandon their post. We find the source, Valerius said, his mind straining against the tide of enforced discipline. The fleet admiral, Joris. The will is centralized. He is the mind of this machine. We must speak to the commander. Navigating the ship was a journey through a perfectly preserved memorial to a lost war. They passed phantoms of Medicaid teams setting up triage stations that would never receive wounded, of comms officers repeating status reports to dead ears, of gunnery crews performing loading drills on silent cannons. The silence was deafening, a roar of suppressed action. It was more unnerving than any battlefield cacophony. Brother Lysios, forced to accompany them by Valerius's order, stumbled often, clutching his helmeted head. He was a sponge in this ocean of martial memory, his own mind flooding with the names, ranks, and serial numbers of 1,000 dead Vostroyans and Cadians that were not his own. They reached the Strategium deck. The blast doors were sealed, glowing with a runic light that pulsed in time with the psychic heartbeat of the ship. Valerius placed a hand on the cold metal. The memory here was not a visual echo. It was a pure conceptual force. The command, the weight, the line. He nodded to Ketis. The sergeant planted a melta-charge. The living fire of its detonation was a shocking violence against the sterile memoryscape. The doors, real and physical beneath the psychic projection, blew inward. The bridge of His Divine Victory was a temple to command. It was vast, tiered, and thrumming with silent, spectral activity. Hundreds of phantom officers sat at their stations, their hands moving over dead controls, their eyes fixed on tactical holograms that showed a static, frozen image of the Cadian Gate before the fall. And on the central command dais, standing before a great oculus that showed the graveyard of his own fleet, was the source. Fleet Admiral Joris was not a translucent phantom. He was solid, a figure carved from gray stone and hardened resolve. He wore his elaborate uniform, every metal pristine. His hands were clasped behind his back. He stared out at the dead fleet, his face an immovable mask of strategic calculation. He did not turn as they entered. "Admiral Joris," Valerius announced, his voice booming in the psychic silence. The Admiral did not react. He spoke, his voice the same as the broadcast, crisp and absolute, but it was not directed at them. It was part of the loop. "Signal to all vessels. Form battle line Kappa. Enemy fleet massing at bearing 030. Macro cannon batteries to fire on my mark. There will be no retreat. The gate must hold." A phantom flag lieutenant next to him saluted. "Aye, Admiral. The line holds." "Admiral!" Valerius shouted, stepping onto the dais. He was within arm's reach of the solidified memory. "The battle is over. The gate has fallen. Cadia is gone." Nothing. Joris's eyes scanned a non-existent data slate held by a phantom aide. Chaplain Boreas stepped forward, his litany of release beginning to spill from his lips. The golden light of his faith washed over the Admiral. For the first time, the loop stuttered. Joris's head turned, minutely. His eyes, chips of flint, passed over Boreas, through Valerius, and back to the oculus. "Signal interference," Joris stated, a new line in the memory. "Potential warp, echo. Ignore. Maintain focus. The enemy is the true target." He was not just a memory. He was a will that had refused the very concept of cessation. He had taken the final, absolute order, hold the line, and with the collective psychic strength of every soul who died obeying it, he had made that order the eternal, unchangeable reality of this space. To break it would not be an act of mercy, but an act of strategic treason in his mind. "He cannot hear you," Boreas said, his litany faltering. "He hears only the order. It is not just in his mind, it is his mind." Valerius understood the horrific truth. They could not reason with this. They could not console it. The kindly teacher's love had built a peaceful prison. The Admiral's duty had built a fortress, and a fortress was not opened with a key. It was breached. He looked around the bridge, at the countless phantom officers, all trapped in their Admiral's unwavering will. Then he looked at the main tactical hololith, frozen in time. The solution presented itself, a thing of brutal, surgical horror. "We do not break his will," Valerius said, his voice cold as the void. "We fulfill his order." He turned to Cadus, the ship's power core, the main plasma reactor. It is still physically present, still generating the energy that sustains this stasis. We overload it. We trigger a catastrophic breach. Boreas stared at him. "You would destroy His Divine Victory a second time?" "No," Valerius corrected, his gaze locked on the unmoving admiral. "We will give him his battle. We will become the enemy inbound. We will force a final, decisive engagement."
And in that engagement, His divine victory will be destroyed, upholding its duty to the last. It will be a real death, on a real battlefield, against a real enemy. It is the only victory condition his logic will accept. It was a blasphemy. It was an act of war against a monument. It was the only form of compassion left to give. The reactor, Valerius ordered, make it seem like a targeted strike. Use melta charges, crack grenades, make it a battle, then we withdraw, and we let the ship die fighting, as it was always meant to. As Cetus moved to relay the orders, the Admiral spoke again. His voice, for the first time, held a note that was almost satisfaction. "Enemy contact confirmed. Reactor sector. They have taken the bait. All batteries, fire at will. The line holds." On the Phantom tactical display, a single, flashing rune appeared over the schematic of His Divine Victory's own power core. The enemy had been identified. It was them. His Divine Victory awoke. It did not come to life with klaxons and shouted orders. Those had been a constant, silent hum for a decade. It awoke with a shift in its psychic resonance. The disciplined preparation hardened into focused, lethal intent. The Phantom crew on the bridge stopped their repetitive tasks. As one, they turned their heads towards the Space Marines, 1,000 pairs of eyes, glowing with the cold light of duty, fixed upon the living intruders. The air itself crystallized with hostility. Admiral Jors finally turned fully from the oculus. His stony gaze swept over them, not with recognition, but with tactical assessment. Boarding action confirmed. Primary target, Command Nexus. Secondary target, Reactor Core. They seek to cripple us. His voice was no longer a simple recording. It was adaptive, a command intelligence reacting to a new variable. Containment protocol iron resolve. All security phantoms to intercept. Gunnery crews, reroute power from mass batteries. Internal point defense, authorized. The effect was instantaneous. The spectral officers drawing their ceremonial pistols were one thing. The walls themselves were another. Conduits running along the ceiling shimmered and solidified, not into metal, but into the forms of naval armsmen, coalescing from the memory of the ship's security protocols. They raised lost rifles of solidified light. The deck plating rippled, and figures in heavy void armor rose, heft in plasma cutters and shotguns. They're using the ship's memory of its own defenses. Cetus yelled, "Open and fire!" Bolter shells tore through a Phantom armsman, who dissolved into shimmering mist, only for another to form from a different conduit to meters away. They're endless. "Fall back," Valerius ordered, his plasma pistol searing a corridor through a line of forming phantoms to the reactor access. "We must make our fight there believable." Their retreat from the bridge was a running battle through a nightmare of architectural memory. Both had sealed themselves with psychic force, forcing them to blast through with melta charges. Corridors that were empty 1 second would be filled the next with a full Phantom firing line. Their lost shots burning with a cold, soul-numbing energy that cracked ceramite and sapped strength. The Phantoms did not scream, did not taunt. They fought with silent, machine-like precision. An immune system attacking an infection. Brother Lycaios was faltering. The onslaught of martial memory was too much for his already compromised psyche. He moved sluggishly, firing at shadows, calling out names from the Phantom regiments. "Hold the line. Martova, for Sadia, Seluk." Valerius grabbed him, shoving him forward. "Fight the pressed, brother. They are not your kin." "But they are," Lycaios slurred, his helmet speakers buzzing with static. "They are all the Emperors. We are leaving them to die again." They reached the primary reactor access shaft, a vast, vertical tunnel plunging into the heart of the ship. The heat here was not psychic, but real, leading from the still-functioning plasma core far below. The Phantoms were denser here, a glowing wall of techadats and engineering crew, their forms interwoven with the real machinery, as if they were part of the reactor systems. "Now," Valerius commanded, "make it count." Target the primary plasma feed conduits, the heat exchange regulators. The first company transformed the shaft into a charnel house of light and metal. Melta beams cut through real plating, severing feeds that vented superheated gas and screaming jets. Cracked grenades slammed into regulator houses, blowing them apart in showers of shrapnel and actinic energy. They were not just sabotaging, they were performing a brutal, convincing attack on the ship's vitals. His divine victory reacted, as any living ship would to such an assault. It rerouted power, it fought back. But its weapons were its memories. From grates and service hatches, phantom damage control teams emerged, not with tools, but with welding lasers of solid grief that could fuse a space marine's armor joints. The very air grew thick with the memory of radiation leaks, a psychic poison that bypassed physical seals and made the mind taste metal and decay. High above, on the bridge, Admiral Jorce observed it all. Through the ship's psychic gestal, he gave a slow, grim nod of approval. This was a proper battle, a worthy test. Reactor integrity failing, core breach imminent, a phantom engineering officer's reported, his voice calm. Understood, Jorce said. All hands, brace for catastrophic engagement, signaled to the fleet. He paused, the logic of his eternal moment finally encountering a terminal variable. There was no fleet to signal, only graves. The Frausin hologram of the Tsadian date flickered on his display. For a nanosecond, a crack appeared in the stony mask, a flicker of cosmic loneliness, faster than any void. Then it was gone, sealed under absolute purpose. Signal, the line is held, the price is paid, his divine victory, out. Deep in the reactor shaft, warning sirens that had been silent for a decade blared to life, powered by dying emergency cells. The great plasma core, its containment fields destabilized by the pinpoint attacks, began to pulse with an unstable, malevolent light. The core is going critical. Withdraw, Valerius voxed, grabbing the catatonic Lysias, all squads, to the extraction point now. They fought their way back through a ship that was now dying in earnest. The phantoms were not attacking anymore. They were standing at their posts, bracing, saluting, or simply waiting, their forms beginning to soften and blur as the psychic energy binding them was sucked towards the failing reactor. The memory was collapsing into its finale. The boarding torpedoes launched just as his divine victories. Reactor 1 supercritical. It did not explode. It unmade itself in a silent, expanding sphere of white light that consumed the ghost ship from the inside out. The light was not fiery, but clean and cold, a psychic scrubbing of the monumental wool that had held it together. For a moment, the silhouettes of a million souls were visible within it, standing in ranks, a final, spectral fleet. Then the light faded, leaving nothing. No debris, no energy signature, just an empty point in space where a wall of adamant had finally, faithfully, ceased. On the bridge of the divine retribution, Valerius watched the sensor logs, absolute void. He turned to Lysias, who had been secured in a restraint field. The wounded brother was whispering, not with others' voices, but with his own, thin and broken. "It's quiet," Lysias said. "The singing, the orders, the lullaby, it's all quiet." He looked at Valerius, his eyes clear for the first time in days, and filled with a horror all his own. "Captain, what did we do?" Valerius had no answer that would feed in a report. They had not purged corruption. They had committed an act of catastrophic empathy. They had become the enemy in a dead man's war to grant him peace. The Imperium's greatest strength and questioning loyalty had become, in death, its most terrifying vulnerability. They looked at the starfield, now truly empty. The ghosts of the Cicatrix Maledictum were out there, countless, trapped in loops of their own finest moments, and the only weapon against them was a love cruel enough to kill them a second time. "We held the line," Valerius finally said, the words ash in his mouth. It was the only truth left. The return to sanctified space was not a relief. It was an indictment, the divine retribution translated back into the calm, predictable void of a patrolled Imperial corridor, the golden light of a stable sun glinting off its scarred hull. The contrast with the absolute, psychic-haunted blackness they had left behind was almost offensive in its normality. Crewmen went about their duties, but the silence on the lower decks was no longer one of discipline. It was the silence of a ship that had returned from a funeral no one could name, carrying a grief that had no object. In his quarters, Captain Valerius faced the sealed, blood-red missive from the Ordo Malleus. It had arrived via a screaming astropathic burst. The moment they had re-entered real space, he broke the wax seal, impressed with the sigil of a clenched fist holding a hammer. The message was not on parchment, but etched onto a thin sheet of obsidian. Captain Valerius, mission parameters updated. Your vessel is designated soul sign. Your findings are NFIRMED by other. Unfortunate. Attack Cortes. The phenomenon is designated Echolon. IT is a METASTASIZING reality cancer within the CICATRIX footprint. Your Northeast W orders are attached. A data slate built into the obsidian sheet flickered to life. It was not a list of targets.
It was a map, a star chart of the obscurus margin, overlaid with pulsing, sickly green sigils. Dozens of them, hundreds. Each sigil was tagged with a name: the Weeping Citadel of Vaxos, the Iron Choir of Forge World Hegemon, the Sorrow Fleet of Admiral Thule, the Laughing Children of Hive de Solum. The list scrolled on, a litany of fresh, intimate hells. They were not to destroy them all. The message was clear. That was impossible. They were to catalog, to assess the severity, the nature of the emotional resonance, the potential for demonic exploitation, or, worse, for the echolock to spread, to infect living populations with the unresolved dead. They were to become not warriors, not even mercy killers, but pathologists of the soul. Valerius's hand tightened on the slate. They were to study the suffering, to quantify the tragedy, to walk amidst the eternal weeping, and take notes for an Imperium that dared not acknowledge the scale of its own spiritual calamity. A second personal addendum scrolled into view in a different, sharper text. Valerius, the brother you carry, Lysios. His condition is the key. He is a living receptor, a tuning fork for the echo. He is now an asset. His pain is a tool. Use him to locate the loci. Use him to understand the resonance. Do not let his sacrifice be in vain. The Emperor's will is not always kind. It is necessary. The coldness of it was absolute. Lysios's torment, his infestation by the whispers of the dead, was to be institutionalized. He was to be made a canary in a coal mine of galactic grief. Valerius stood and walked to the apothecarian. Lysios was out of restraints, sitting on the edge of a Medicae slab. He looked up as Valerius entered. The confusion and borrowed horror were gone, replaced by a hollow, knowing exhaustion. "You read the orders," Lysios said. "It wasn't a question. I did. They want to use me." Lysios's voice was flat. "I can feel them, you know. Not clearly. Not like before, but like a pressure, a tide. Out there." He gestured weakly towards the hull. "The one you called the Weeping Citadel. It's not a place. It's a feeling. It's the moment a million people realized their walls would not hold. It's sustained. It's hungry for witnesses." Valerius saw the resolve he needed to kindle was not one of battle zeal, but of a darker, more accepting purpose. "The Imperium has no tools for this war, Lysios. We must forge them, from whatever metal is to hand, even if that metal is our own sorrow. You have seen the enemy's face. You have carried its voice. That makes you our only guide. To lead us to more suffering," Lysios stated. "To lead us to understand it," Valerius corrected, though the difference felt academic. "So that one day, perhaps, someone might find a way to prevent it, to seal this breach in death itself." Lysios gave a slow, grim nod. He was a space marine. His purpose was service. Even if the service was to be a living scar, a sympathetic nerve for the galaxy's pain. "Where first?" Valerius called up the star chart. One sigil pulsed with a sharper, more urgent rhythm than the others. It was not the largest, but the annotation was chilling. Echo lock shows signs of active propagation. Psychic resonance bleeding into neighboring star system. Living population reporting hauntings and shared grief dreams. Potential for cascade event. It was labeled, The Dirge, Cradle of Lethe. They are learning, Chaplain Boreas said, his voice coming from the doorway. He had read the orders too. The dead are not just repeating. They are evolving. The Dirge Cradle, a place of birth, not death. What horror festers there? Lysios closed his eyes, his face tightening in concentration. After a long moment, a single tear, clean and purely his own, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Not horror, he whispered, his voice filled with a dread that was now his authentic own. Longing, a longing so deep it pulls. It's for the living. It wants to reconnect. It doesn't want witnesses, Captain. It wants participants. The new frontier was before them. They had dealt with the ghosts of soldiers, of teachers, of admirals. These were the echoes of defined lives. But what was the echo of a birthplace? Of a world of mothers, infants, and future hopes, all severed in an instant by the Cicatrix's birth pangs? The divine retribution, now the soul scythe, turned its prow towards the Lethe system. It sailed not towards a battle, but towards a womb of cosmic regret. Valerius knew they were no longer just fighting for the Imperium. They were fighting for the very sanctity of an ending. And in a universe where even death could be corrupted, their only remaining duty was to be the last brutal arbiters of silence. The ship slid into the warp, the scream of its Geller field, a feeble protest against the howling tides of unresolved endings that now awaited them. The Lethe system hung in the void like a corrupted jewel. Its sun was a sullen bronze orb, its light seeming to ooze rather than shine. Primary world, Lethe V, the Dirge Cradle, was a world of tempered beauty now shrouded in a perpetual, psychically charged haze. From a distance, it looked like a morning veil draped over a cradle. Their augurs, even from the edge of the system, painted a picture of profound, active wrongness. Atmospheric composition normal, the auspex, Master reported, his voice tight. Biosphere reading is healthy. Vegetation, water, life signs. But the life signs are wrong. They're not individual. They're a mass. A single, pulsing biopsionic signature covering the entire habitable zone. It reads as one organism. Population records? Valerius asked, though he dreaded the answer. Pre-Cicatrix, 800 million. A civilized world, high cultural output, notable for its birthing sanctuaries and educational crèches. It was a world dedicated to nurturing. And now, no breakdown, just the single signal. And these. The officer brought up secondary scans. Energy signatures flared across the planet's surface. Not weapons, not industry. They were complex, beautiful patterns of light, swirling in vast, slow dances above continents and oceans. They looked like auroras made of grief. The dirges, Lysios said from the command deck entrance. He was in full battle plate, but he looked diminished, hunched slightly, as if under a great weight. His eyes were fixed on the swirling patterns on the screen. They're not songs, they're laments for futures that never were. They're calling. Chaplain Boreas studied the data slate from the Ordo Malleus. The report indicates the initial echo lock was formed from the planetary population's collective psychic shock at the moment of the Great Rift's birth. But instead of fracturing into individual echoes, their shared focus, their collective identity as nurturers, as carers fused them. They became a single, planetary-scale echo, a cradle that cannot let go, because what it cradles is gone, Valerius concluded, the horror dawning. It is a mother's love with no child, a teacher's purpose with no student. It is an emotion without an object, made sentient and desperate on a global scale. He turned to Lysios. You said it wants participants, not witnesses. Lysios nodded, a shiver running through his armored frame. It doesn't want to show us its pain. It wants to make us its pain, to give its love something to hold. to give its lullaby a living ear. The implications were clear and more dangerous than any phantom fleet. An echo that could actively recruit, that could assimilate the living into its pattern of loss. It was a psychic virus of perfect, terrible love. "We cannot bombard it," Katie stated the obvious. "Our orders are to assess and contain." "Containment of this is a joke," Boreas growled. "How do you quarantine a feeling? How do you build a wall against a lullaby that reaches into your soul?" "By giving it what it seeks," Valerius said, the plan forming in his mind like a slow, cold poison. "And then severing the connection with absolute finality. We must make it focus. We must give it a target for its longing, a child for its empty cradle." All eyes turned to him. He looked at Lysios. "No," Katie said, stepping forward. "Captain, he is our brother. He is not bait. He is our tuning fork," Valerius replied, his voice iron. "And he is already connected. The echo feels him. It knows he carries the whispers of others. He is a broken vessel, and broken vessels attract those who wish to fill them." He approached Lysios. "This is not an order I can give, brother. This is a request for a sacrifice beyond any battlefield. You must go down there. You must walk into the heart of the dirge. You must let it try to love you, to make you part of its song. And in that moment of connection, when its attention is focused entirely on assimilating a living, sympathetic soul, we will strike at the planetary psychic locus." Lysios met his gaze. "How?" "The primary birthing sanctuary. The records indicate it was the largest on Lethe V, the heart of the world's identity. It will be the heart of the Echo. Boreas will deploy with a squad of our strongest-willed brothers, armed with psi suppressors and vortex grenades. When the Echo is focused on you, they will plant the devices at the sanctuary's core. They will not destroy the Echo. They will create a localized psychic singularity. A drain. It will suck the coherent consciousness of the dirge cradle into a vortex and collapse it in upon itself. It will be a true death," Boreas said, understanding. "Not a release, but an annihilation. There will be no beautiful fading. It will be scream, pulled into a hole and erased. It is the only mercy left," Valerius said, though the word mercy had long since lost all meaning.